Well, good morning, Good News Baptist Church. Today's a little different. 2020 is a little different. I'm excited to be with you. I'm thankful that you guys have given me the opportunity to speak to you in this way. I know it's a little bit different, but I'm thankful for you guys being a little bit flexible with us as we're just trying to limit our exposure a little bit. And so I know Christmas in 2020 looks a little bit different. I think we've all experienced a very odd year, and Christmas has been, it goes hand in hand with 2020. It's just been a weird year for Christmas. A lot of our traditions that we usually do, including just us as a family, we haven't been able to do. Dan and Patty live 2 blocks away. We've never lived closer to them, but yet we can't celebrate with them. All of us are experiencing similar things to that. But as a family, we have one tradition that I know that we're going to be able to do. Now, I'm recording this a couple days before Christmas, so I'm looking forward to Thursday night, Christmas Eve, because that is one of my favorite traditions, and it's an easy one that I know that we're going to be able to keep, and that is watching It's a Wonderful Life as a family. I love It's a Wonderful Life. I know in past sermons, I think I've touched on it a little bit, just how much I adore this movie. And the reason why is because of George Bailey. Just look at the guy.
With brushes, combs.
No.
Look, Joe. Now look, I want a big one.
He seems like a really good guy. He's nice, he's charming, he's funny, he's bold, he's generous. He gives up everything he has for his community. I love that guy. He's a good guy. But as you guys know in the movie, he gets into a situation that he just can't see a way out. There's no escaping it. There's this money problem that is hanging over him. There's a warrant for his arrest, and he thinks of ending his life. As Clarence says, throwing away God's greatest gift. He's there on the bridge. And this is a Christmas movie. It's supposed to be joyful and happy, and yet here we are with this character ready to commit suicide, and I watch it every year. Why do I do it? Well, because that's not the end of his story. Even though there on the bridge, George Bailey, he has no escape from his situation, no way to redeem himself. He's got no hope. He's feeling like he has no purpose in life. He's feeling like it would be better if he had never been born, and is ready to take that plunge. We know, or maybe you haven't seen the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, I don't know how to help you, but other than going and watching it, maybe like tonight would be good. But if you haven't seen it, it's a story of redemption, and that's why I love it. I love that his family and his friends come to his help, and they're the ones who redeem him out of that situation because he couldn't save himself. And it's a beautiful picture of a very biblical idea of redemption. And today we're going to be looking at that idea of redemption and looking at Christmas and how does Christmas and redemption go hand in hand. So I'll ask you to turn your Bible to the book of Ruth, and we're going to kind of do it a little different. Usually when I come and I preach and I'm with you guys, I stay in one text and we just walk through that text. Today is going to be a little different. I'm not there with you, and I feel like, well, why not change it up just a little bit? So today is more of a Bible study, and we're going to kind of look at a bigger view of this book of Ruth, and then we'll come into the New Testament a little bit too. So if you're there in Ruth chapter 1, it reads in verse 1, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The names of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So right off the bat, we have this general idea of the time frame. It was the days of the judges. So what that means is there is not rule and order in the land of Israel and the surrounding areas. We don't have King David sitting on the throne and giving out justice from that throne and everyone obeys the law because the king is on that throne. We don't have anything like that. We have this period of time where the Word of God says that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And we have some individuals who come in and kind of keep the peace and mostly free Israel from oppressors. So it's during that time when there's no social welfare. There's no government structure to help someone if they're down on their luck. It is just family. Family is what you relied on in those times. And I feel like in 2020, family is what you rely on. It's very similar. But we have this woman named Naomi who is married to Elimelech, and they move into this country of Moab. So away from their hometown, which is Bethlehem, they go and they move to this further out country because, well, they thought we can make a living here and there's a famine, and so we need to provide for our family. So let's go where there might be opportunity. Sounds like a good plan, but that becomes terrible because Elimelech dies. And when he dies, Naomi is just on her own. And she has no prospects. She's older at this point, but she does have 2 sons. And these 2 sons, they grow up and they take 2 Moabite wives because they live there in Moab. And one is Orpah. I always thought it was Oprah, but it's Orpah. And one is Ruth. And so we know what's going to happen to Ruth. Orpah is going to leave town in a little bit because their husbands then die. Like, if you think of Naomi, you think, man, this woman just went through so much pain. She leaves her country, her friends, her family, and goes to Moab following her husband. Husband dies. She has 2 sons, though, and so she's thinking, all right, maybe we can make a life for ourselves in this new country. Those 2 sons die, and then she's left here with 2 girls looking at her to provide for her, for themselves, and she's like, I don't know. I have no way of supporting you. I have no way of helping you. And so she says, maybe it's time for you guys to just go home. Because you also need to remember, like they moved, Naomi and Elimelech, they move from Bethlehem to Moab, take Moabite wives. So we're going to assume that those families of Orpah and Ruth are at least close by. And so Naomi's thinking to herself, well, just go back to your families. Go back to your families and, like everyone else who's relying on their families in this time when there's no law, there's no structure to any government, no social welfare of any kind. Well, just rely on your family and you guys will make it. And she's going to go back home. And so we have this moment where Orpah heads out and she's like, okay, I'm going to go. But we have this moment in verse 14. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So Ruth didn't want to go. Ruth didn't want to go. She wanted to stay with Naomi. And even though there wasn't any prospects, there wasn't any way that they were going to get out of this situation, or at least nothing that they could think of. I mean, if you look even at verse 11, look at this. Let's just read this for a minute. But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband that night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter." And that's a key idea for Naomi, because that's what she's going to call herself once she returns home. "For it is exceedingly bitter to me, for your sake, that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. And they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So what is Naomi doing here? Naomi is giving these two girls just like a lecture about how they're just not going to get a husband through her in any way. And that was important because a woman at that time, and maybe you know this, but a woman at that time couldn't hold land. She couldn't own property. And so when she became a widow, the husband died, the nearest kin would then marry her and take over the property and usually give that woman a son so that they could continue the line of that original husband. So this was known as a kinsman redeemer, a family redeemer. And what Naomi is telling them is that there was no hope of having another son to be that kinsman redeemer for these girls. So go home. And Ruth decides not to. Ruth wants to stay with her, and here's why. She says in verse 16, "But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more, if anything but death parts me from you.' And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more." So Naomi gives up her lecturing of Ruth and just says, okay, because Ruth believes in God. Ruth believes she doesn't want to go back home and worship the Moabite gods. She wants to stay with Naomi and worship the one true God, even if that means a life of despair and hardship, even if that means that there can't be a kinsman redeemer who is going to redeem her and Naomi out of that situation so they could, live their lives and have food on their tables and just be able to be, normal functioning human beings. Even if that wasn't the case, Ruth was ready to sacrifice in order to be loyal to Naomi and loyal to their God. So I just love that because we have this picture of a woman who needs redemption. Like they're not going to be able to eat food. As simple as that. They're not going to be able to provide for themselves. They have no home. They have no land. So, what are they supposed to do? There's nothing except for, abandoning God, and she doesn't want to do that. So she's willing to sacrifice, even though it looks at this moment like there's no hope. It looks like there's no possibility of redemption for Ruth or for Naomi, and yet they're still wanting to be loyal and faithful to God. So here we can see very clearly that Ruth needed redemption. And I would even put Ruth and Naomi. They needed redemption. They needed someone to come in, this kinsman redeemer to come in and marry Ruth, give her a son, take over ownership of the land, be generous and kind to her, and take care of her. That's what she needed. And it didn't look like that was going to happen, but she was willing to sacrifice anyways. But that's not the end of the story. Look in chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 1. "Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz." So into our story walks Boaz. Now Boaz is a relative of Elimelech. We don't know exactly, if he's a cousin, first cousin, second cousin, how far down the line of a relative he is. And God is working through this. You might look on the outside and say this is kind of a random story, all these random pieces, people being in play with one another. But God is obviously orchestrating all this to achieve his purposes. And so Boaz is here, he's available, and not only is he available, Boaz is not a slouch. This guy is a stud. Look what it says. It calls him a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech. So this idea of worthy man is actually the same phrase that you'll find in the book of Judges when it talks about a man of valor. And usually in that context, it's talking about a man who is known, who has a reputation of being an incredible warrior, a good fighter. And here, it might be a little bit different. We don't know why the reputation has gotten the way it is. Some scholars think that it's probably just because of how wealthy he was. But the idea that the inspired writer is trying to get across is that Boaz is a stud. He's not some slouch. He's not some well, I guess he'll do. He's a man, so he can take over the ownership and all this. This is someone that any girl, regardless of age, regardless of circumstance, would be lucky to, or I guess we could use a biblical word of blessed, to be married to. And so Boaz is here, and Ruth, for some reason, they did not have knowledge of who Boaz was. If they were looking at like a wall of suitors and trying to figure out who could redeem them, he wasn't on the list. But for some reason, God put him into this position of being close to Ruth and Naomi. And now Ruth and Naomi, when they go looking for food, they run into Boaz. They run into his land. And somehow this relationship begins to develop between these two. But let's look a little bit more at Boaz, because Leon Morris, a great commentarian, when he talks about this idea of a worthy man, he talks about it as, you could think of it like a white knight, like a shining white knight. This is Ruth's white knight coming in to save her. This idea of being a worthy man. But there's so much more to this guy. Look in verse 8, in chapter 2, in verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." So there's a lot to love about Boaz, because Boaz, he is protective. That's the first thing that I see about him. He is protective of Ruth. Ruth is a young woman going and gleaning from the fields, so she's taking some of the seeds, trying to make some kind of a meal for her and Naomi. And this was the one pathway that they found that she was able to have some food come into the household. And so they go and they glean, and it was a noble thing. It was something that actually God commanded, was to let the foreigners of a land come in and glean from the fields, so to be able to make some kind of a living for themselves, of being able to eat. And so Ruth does that. But imagine that in that time when you don't have the law, again, in the days of the judges, a young woman, recent widow, going out into the field by herself with all these workers around, reaping, and she's just, picking up the scraps and the leftovers. Like, that's a scary thing. Like, even, back thousands of years ago, men were the same men that they are today. It was a dangerous proposition. And so Boaz here, he says, don't go anywhere else. Don't risk it. Don't risk it. You stay here in my fields. I've already charged my guys. They're good guys, and I've charged them not to touch you. So he's very protective of Ruth. But not just that. He has a passion for God. Look in verse 11. But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and come to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." This guy, Boaz, believes in God. And to the same degree that Ruth believed in God and was unwilling to go back home to where she might find some comfort in life and go and worship the gods of her people, she decides, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to follow after God, and I'm going to sacrifice for it. Even if there is no path to redemption, I'm going to follow after Naomi and her God and worship the one true God. And here Boaz is saying, I haven't taken these other gods of the Moabites. He is a true Hebrew. He believes in God, and he's still following after God. So even the idea of him allowing them to glean from his fields, that was an obedient action from Boaz to God. He believed in God. He's compassionate and he knows God. And then we have some little plans beginning to happen from the women here. Verse 20. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And so Naomi is all of a sudden going wait, something can happen here. He's a good-looking guy. He's a worthy man. He's kind to you. He's taking a liking to you. And did you know that he's one of our kinsmen? This is such a joyful moment in this book after so much death and tragedy. Remember the beginning of this book. Everybody dies. All the guys die. And Orpah goes. So it's just tragedy after tragedy. And then finally, all of a sudden, there's this bright spot. This bright spot of maybe something can happen because Boaz, is the Kinsman Redeemer. He's one of them. And so they begin to think maybe something can happen here. He's wealthy, so he can buy out the property. He's a relative, so everything that is necessary for a redeemer, Boaz meets all those qualifications. So they're thinking to themselves, maybe this is how God is going to redeem us and redeem the land so that they can be back into a position where they could live their lives as they please and not have to scavenge and glean, but could be comfortable and just at peace after all the tragedy. And so then we have a problem because things begin to develop between Boaz and Ruth, but there is a problem in verse 12 of chapter 3. And this is Boaz talking. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. So we have this moment where Boaz and Ruth are talking, and I'm not going to get into all the details because we have some points that I want to make and I want to get us to a certain place. So we're just having this overview of this book. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested in it, go in maybe this week and do some more reading, some more studying here. But we have this conversation between Ruth and Boaz, and she's saying, you're one of my kinsmen, redeem me. Will you redeem me? And he's like, yeah, I will. I want to redeem you. I want to marry you. But there's this snag. There's somebody who's closer. There's someone there that is closer to them as a relative who could then be the redeemer. So Boaz, he goes and he meets with this redeemer. And then we have in chapter 4, verse 6, a little bit of the effect of all of that. Then the redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So there was this issue of this other relative, and maybe he could have come in and redeemed Ruth and Naomi, Ruth herself, and then Naomi by proxy. But he doesn't want to. For whatever reasons, he says that there might be an issue with his inheritance. We don't know exactly what that means, but the idea is, I'll pass. You do it. So he gives the right of redemption to Boaz, which makes Boaz the only person who is qualified to redeem Ruth. Not this guy, because it would affect his inheritance, and there was no one else who was able to do it. There was only one option, and his name was Boaz, and Boaz actually does it. So Boaz is the only one qualified and able to redeem Ruth, and he does here in verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. So we have this beautiful, beautiful moment that Boaz, he redeems Ruth, he marries her, he gives her a son, and here comes Grandma Naomi. And finally, after all the years of hardship, after looking like there was like no hope of redemption, we have this beautiful picture in verse 16. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. So there's Grandma taking care of this little baby Obed, who they probably never thought in a million years that it would actually happen, and God made it happen. God redeemed Ruth through this one qualified man, Boaz. Now, you might be wondering, where's the Christmas connection here? Because we talk about Christmas, but Christmas is all about redemption. And the whole point of Christmas is this idea of Jesus being our kinsman redeemer, that he is our family redeemer. If you'll look in your Bible to Luke chapter 3, sometimes we skip over these passages. Maybe you're like me and you read through Luke chapter 2 on Christmas morning. Maybe you did that this week. We often skip the genealogies, but they're there for a reason, not just to give an account, but sometimes we can find some pretty helpful information. So if you'll look in Luke chapter 3, verse 31, the son of Meliah, the son of Menna, the son of Mattatha, the son of Nathan, the son of David, the son of Jesse, the son of Obed, the son of Boaz, the son of Salah, the son of Nahshon, and the list goes on and on. So Jesus is the son of Boaz. And yes, we're talking about genealogy. So in a physical way, Jesus is the descendant of Boaz, but also in a spiritual way. Boaz is a great picture of what Jesus has done for us. Us, like Ruth, we are not able to redeem ourselves. There was no way that we could buy out the penalty of sin that we have. We don't have, land that needs to be redeemed, but we have a soul that needs to be redeemed, and we can't do that ourselves. There's no hope on our own. There's no way of working hard to attain it. And if we don't have that, there's no purpose in our lives. We aren't able to fulfill that purpose that we have. Every human being has. To glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. We can't do that. And so like Ruth, we are left there being, can anyone redeem us? Is there any way that we could be redeemed? And here comes the son of Boaz, Jesus Christ, into the world, who is the only one qualified to redeem us, who doesn't have sin on his record, who doesn't have any entanglements like that other redeemer. He is there, and he is willing, and he is a worthy redeemer. And so we can have what Paul says, if you turn over to Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter 3, I'll read verse 23 through, probably a very familiar passage to you. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified by His grace as a gift, through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation by His blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in His divine forbearance He had passed over former sins. It was to show His righteousness at the present time, so that He might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. And that's the story of Christmas. The story of Christmas can't just end there in the manger. It's a beautiful picture. We got the cute baby, vulnerable child there in the manger, but that baby has to grow up. That baby has to live a sinless life, to die on the cross on our behalf, to redeem us, to be that kinsman redeemer. Us, like Ruth, no hope, no future, no purpose, and Jesus being like Boaz, worthy of redemption. He comes in and redeems us, and he's the only one who's qualified to do it. And so that's what Christmas is, and we should glorify him for that, for being that amazing, wonderful Redeemer who can bring us out of that condition where we look at and we say we have no hope. He can give us hope. He can give us purpose. He can give us joy, because he is that kinsman redeemer. I'll ask Dylan if he wants to come up and close in prayer or a closing song. I thank you for your attention today and just being able to be with you in this way. The Lord bless you, and I can't wait to see you next time.